So, hi everyone, this is Stefana Muller. I'm the leader of Long Island Women in Tech, and this session is the first of our summer series. Today we have a wonderful speaker, Catherine Dupont, and she's going to go through some content in a minute. But before we get started, I wanted to kick off a few things. The first slide here is just a welcome slide to get you guys to know who we are. So Long Island Women in Tech is a group that was founded last year around this time. We now have 226 members from across Long Island, New York. However, a lot of you who are on the phone today are from elsewhere, and that was the point of these sessions during the summer, is that not everyone can be on Long Island, but everyone deserves this type of content. So that's what we wanted to get across. I do really appreciate you all joining and continuing to promote these events. They're online free, they're for networking, they're for us all to learn and grow in our careers. Okay, let me just move it forward one more. And now I'm going to introduce Catherine. So Catherine, thank you so much for getting up quite early the other day to prep for this call. I know that you're in California, but I just wanted to give you all just a background on Catherine. Catherine has been in project management for over 10 years, and she does the Agile type work as well, so Agile and Waterfall type project management, but she's done both. She's got a PMP and is a certified Scrum Master, and she's a native of San Francisco. I think she's just an all-around, really well-versed PMI certified individual and professional, and somebody that we can definitely value from her content, or find value from her content. So let's get started, Catherine. I will kick it over to you now.
Okay, thank you for that nice introduction.
No problem.
Definitely appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. I hope everyone is having a great Friday, great productive Friday from across the country and elsewhere. I was just wondering, while you guys were prior to the call, where is everyone, what is the demographic of people who are on the call? Where are people from? Stefana, were we able to collect some information on industries or project roles, or where people were signing in from?
Yeah, that's a good question. I asked everyone in the chat if you can respond. What is your industry, and where are you calling in from? I see Melissa's from New Jersey, and I know she's from an ISV, independent software vendor. Are you in the healthcare space, aerospace, government, insurance? If you all can chat in the chat. Information technology, we've got a Scrum Master from Islandia. Hey, Tina. Anyone else?
Okay.
Let's see. A software company in Portland. Custom business solutions and database consulting. So there we go. We've got a few different types of folks on the phone. Does that help, Catherine?
That's excellent. Yes, yes. That helps me be able to connect better with people who are here listening, so that I can perhaps add a few things, or keep in mind a few things that where risk is perhaps done particularly differently in certain industries, or to address things that might be relevant there. So great. That sounds like a nice diverse makeup of different people or women in different industries. So we'll just get right into the content. So as everyone knows, this is a presentation on how to address risk and issue management in your projects. And my goal today is to engage everyone to make this a collaborative discussion, and to go through some primer points on risk management in project management, popular areas and pain points that people I've encountered in different industries would like to know more about, so that managing this part of it helps their projects become more successful, and hitting, of course, the triple constraint of resources, cost, and time management, as that triple constraint hits affects the quality of the project, and how risk plays a huge factor. Managing risk well plays a huge factor in bringing in projects well. So we can go to the next slide, and I'll just quickly go over some of the contents we'll be discussing, looking at objectives, a definition of risk, and an overview of that, some roles and responsibilities pertaining to risk, and some tips and guidelines that people might find informative and useful in terms of dealing with risk in their everyday jobs. Next slide. Okay, so here we have as our objective talking through what would be a more methodical approach to find out what risk is, to define it, identify it, and to be able to communicate to your stakeholders and your sponsors, everyone who's affected by project risk, to manage the program risk and issues there, to see methodically how the process goes in terms of a risk management life cycle of a project. We will be looking at criteria to quantify risks and issues. So, some simple formula so that people can calculate how risk looks like and how big that quantifiable risk would affect projects, and then some roles and responsibilities to manage risk and issues within an organization's project. So that's the agenda. And of course, we are looking at risky endeavors, and she certainly, the woman who's climbing, certainly looks like she's in control. She doesn't look scared and confident, but she certainly looks like she's in danger, and what she's doing is a very risky thing. So we're doing that every day as we do our projects. So not to that physical degree that we're doing, though it's sometimes the stress and pressure might make it seem like that. Okay, next slide. So defining what risk is, basically it's having an undesirable event occur, or having something positive, a desirable result, not occurring, and the consequences and the bad things that come because of an impact of a risk occurring. So project risks can potentially affect a project's completion success. It can affect the completion within a project, and it might affect critical project milestones in meeting those successfully, and there might be a risk of not having the project complete with the right resources or the appropriate resources, and technical and performance expectations might not be met, and expected results for business requirements and objectives might not be met. All those things that I identified can potentially affect a project's success. And an issue then is when a risk then materializes. It's an undesirable event, something that was feared and now has materialized. And the desirable result or event, or the anticipated positive outcome is not now occurring because the bad thing, the consequence has occurred. So I'll pause here and see if there are any questions on definition of risk or issues.
Just a reminder, everyone, your lines are muted, so if you do want to ask a question throughout this session, you can definitely use the chat bar to ask a question about the definition of risk. There are no questions, Catherine, right now.
Okay, so I will proceed. Thank you. With the first poll question that we have. So how does risk negatively impact a project? There are 5 choices. If you guys would like to participate by being in the chat function, that would be wonderful. So first option is missed project deliverable, deployment date, budget overrun, business outcome that's unexpected, inability to meet technical requirements, or all of the above. And let's see what people say.
So it looks like everyone is in the all of the above area. So we did
okay.
Let's see if I can give you guys the results. I think they got it.
Okay, cool. Great. Very
all right. We'll go back.
Bunch of people. Yes, Friday afternoon. Great. So super. So we've established that the definition of risk and issue. We'll now go to the next slide and talk about the process of defining risk and an overview of that. They are risks are identified throughout the life cycle of a project, but that's broken into two parts. There's an initial risk assessment where even before the project has begun planning and the initiation phase, that there's an initial risk assessment where the person who's going to be the PM will sit down with the stakeholders and take a look at the project timeline, the schedule, the budget that it has, the resources that it has, availability of the stakeholders, and to our project deliverables done in the time we want. So that's at the beginning, before any work is done. The other phase is throughout the life cycle of a project, where risk and issue identification is done throughout the project. It's actively done through the planning, execution, and monitoring phase, all the way to close, where everyone on the team actively engages in risk and issue identification and management. It's not just the project manager, because the project manager sometimes just has a bird's eye or an overview of the project, and members of the team who have more granularity into the project work and the different phases and things that happen who are closer to the action, can identify things and bring that to the attention of the project manager, who can then document it in a risk register or a SharePoint, however the way the organization uses its methods to document risk and issues. Okay, next slide. All right, so basically we want to make sure that when we are identifying risks and issues, that we're doing a favor for our management stakeholders and for our executive sponsors, that we are letting them know that, hey, there's a risk, there's a danger that this project might not be complete, and you have to help us. Otherwise, we won't get it done. So raising the alarm to let them know that risk and issue management, that risks and issues are going to occur, is one of the nicest, the best things you could do for management. They love hearing about that in general, in my experience, and want to do what they can to remove the roadblocks. Next slide. Okay, sorry. Okay, so here we have a little bit more of a granularity to dive in with the risk process definition. And I would just go over these pretty quickly. As I mentioned, there's the initial risk assessment phase that happens at the beginning of a project. The phase of risk and issue management that happens during the planning, execution, and monitoring phases, where more risks, individual risks, and issue identification are noted, because when you're going into the project, you're going into the guts of the project and seeing all the different things that pop up that you're not seeing when you're looking at a project from a bird's eye view at the beginning, where nothing has started. Once something starts, it's like then everything, then things just materialize. The third phase of it would be, the planning, execution, monitoring, and closing phases, as I mentioned earlier. And then when risks and issues occur, or when there's a possibility that a risk occurs, a good practice is to have it documented in a risk register. and the risk register should have the risk, an owner, and an action item, and when it's going to be resolved. Because risks, not when it's going to be resolved, sorry, but a risk should be monitored to understand the probability of it occurring. And then when a risk becomes an issue, that too should be put in a spreadsheet or a SharePoint or some kind of document repository so that everyone can see that a certain project has an issue or certain risks, and that the issue be identified as having an owner, and that something be done to the risk, rather the issue, that it be either accepted, that it can be that someone in management or an executive sponsor will be able to throw some resources at it or some money and to then make it go away, or something to resolve it. But in terms of documenting risks and issues, it's a living, actionable document that ideally would be brought up in project status meetings, weekly or biweekly project status meetings, however frequently people choose to have them, and monitored so that they're just not put on a document and forgotten, because that's not active project management. Risk and issue management is a big part of that, and a valued part of that for management and executive sponsors. They generally want to know what is going on in a project from a high level, and if it's in trouble, they want to step in and be helpful in whatever way they can. What they don't like is to be blindsided by risks and issues and be told that, though they have no way to react. So this is kind of the process at a high level for risk and issue management.
Hey, Catherine, I have a quick question for you. I just put it in the chat. This is, one of the things that often comes up in my projects is that we don't know when to review risks, or is there a specific portion of the Agile cycle that you should step in and say, okay, here's a risk review? Is it every stand-up meeting? Is it, a scrum of scrums? What is your assessment of the best time to review risks with the team and then with management?
Oh, well, with an Agile project management process or a hybrid, risks could be ideally identified in the stand-ups, in the daily stand-ups, because those would materialize as roadblocks to people completing what they are intending, for that day or for that sprint. But it's an active way. But risk and issue management is an active process. I mean, it doesn't even have to be done during the stand-ups. So that's a forum where a good forum where that could happen. It could be, someone saying, "Oh yeah, I had a meeting. I heard from someone that someone's leaving the project. This is an important technical person, and we can't proceed." So instantly, it's a risk and very possibly an issue materializing that. So communication is very key to doing this, and risk identifying risks and issues just goes on all the time. And the forum would for communicating it through to management would be through a couple of ways. There are project status reports that the project managers turn in, and the project status report has a risk and issue section that the person fills out, and maybe a monthly a dashboard. It depends on how frequently you guys do dashboard reporting, but a dashboard that goes to senior management and the sponsors so that they too are aware. Does that address your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure. And are there other questions around this? Okay. Okay, roles and responsibilities. There's a lot of information here, but I think the relevant information would be focusing on the second column for project manager. And because not everyone works in a PMO or has a program manager and the roles for program executives are a little different. But the relevance of a PM's responsibilities for risk management are, I think, very relevant. And as responsibilities, what we have as a project manager is that we identify as inputs what the raw risk and issue information that we are getting from our team, from different people all on the team, up at management executives, people who are doing other work, to understand what's going on, what the status is. Then the PM, as I mentioned earlier, they do the initial risk assessment with the project team before the project kicks off. They then determine a likelihood and impact of that risk happening. They create mitigation and resolution plans if needed for some of the higher quantifiable risks, and we'll go into quantifying risks a little later. You might want to require having an action plan for that, because the higher rated risks would probably derail the project, and you'd want to do something like that. Everything else, you might want to have some kind of mitigation plan in the back of your mind if you may not want to detail it. Yeah, you need to have updated risk and issue information, and ideally, weekly project status meetings are a fantastic way to communicate that. And then we'll talk about criteria to address risk and issue ratings, which is an easy formula that I'll go through later. Again, mitigate risk and issues, escalate issue items to management and executives. So once a risk becomes something very probable and or an issue materializes, as I mentioned earlier, management and sponsors really want to know that information as soon as possible, and so that they can do something about it and get in front of it. In my experience, that's been one of the most important things they feel that they can contribute to a project by being actively engaged with the other zillions of things they're doing. Let's see, the PMO stuff may not be relevant. Risk and issue closure, as I mentioned earlier, if you're documenting an actual risk and or an issue on a risk register, which can be just an Excel spreadsheet, identifying that it's a risk, what the risk is, the probability of it occurring, who's owning it, and to monitor it, and if there's a resolution, that would be something, that would be a good thing to do. It doesn't have to be complicated. Ideally, it would be in a SharePoint, a Dropbox, Google Docs, whatever people use as a shared as a thing for shared files, so that everyone can see the status and not have to do unnecessary email. So those, oh, and then outputs. Output would be after every weekly project status meeting, would update the risk register, the risk and issue register, with what is happening with that risk. Has it been resolved? Do we close it? Is it still there? Is someone doing something about it? Just some action items, so that when people look at the shared document drive and look at the risk, they can understand what is going on, and that it's a living document that people are addressing those risks and issues through actionable items. That's important to not let it just stagnate and not have anyone pay attention to that. Okay. So let's go.
Catherine, we have one question before we get to the next slide. The question is, and I think Tina and I have pretty much the same question, who on the Scrum team would manage these responsibilities? So when you're working in Agile, sometimes you don't have a project manager sitting on the Scrum team. How does that shift from when you're in a typical project, environment versus Agile?
Well, I think
who would manage those responsibilities?
That would be reflected in the, I think in basically how it's affecting the burn down chart and perhaps impacting some of the stories. So if the Scrum Master is the person who is helping to revise the stories and identifying the risks, and there's a whiteboard to capture that, then that can be done on a whiteboard, and then the product owner would ideally be notified of changes that are coming up in the sprints and in the upcoming deliverables, so that they too are not surprised.
Yeah, I do like that in what you said there, because it's funny, it's how we're running it today. And on my team, the one thing I noticed is that we don't do what you just said, that have that update to the risk log and have a central log of all those risks. And I think that's a key point, that when you move to Agile, you can't lose that rigor. What do you think?
I agree, because even though you're doing it a different way, or somewhat different way, the risk and issues are still there, and they still need to be communicated through different through Agile channels to the right people who can do something about it, so that they're aware. Yes, totally.
Great, thank you. All right, let's move on to your next slide. Go ahead.
Okay, so we are then just looking at you know, what can we do on a project that is not necessarily impossible to do and super risky. Sometimes sponsors want the moon, and project managers, and they don't give the project managers the appropriate resources and budget and people to do it, and the appropriate schedule. Sometimes they give us too little time. So we all want, you know, wonderful things like, you know, the Barbie image, Barbie wannabe image here. Sometimes we take it too far. So how far is too far, as we are, as this image is saying, in terms of it taking beauty to extremes. How are we taking project to extremes with risk, with not evaluating risk well? So initial risk assessment. Here I'm just going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the things that we would be looking initially at a project with initial risk assessment. As I mentioned, as I touched on earlier, you know, some of these things might involve having sponsors who are too busy to pay attention to the project, and they don't make meetings, they're not aware of what's going on, but they have the power to stop a project and then to say, well, why didn't you tell me so? Because they're not fully participating. That can be very dangerous to a project, that sponsors are not participating, or they don't, they just don't have time for it. Of course, budgeting. There's, you know, is there ever enough money for to do a project right? You know, you can do that in terms of scoping it and doing tricks with that, but there are possible funding issues where the project is not properly, doesn't have the proper amount of dollars to make it successful. But people are saying, okay, well, you're a great project manager. You can do this. You can do this with the budget we have. Unrealistic schedule. Well, sometimes deliverables are needed in too short of a time, and that might just not be, you know, something that the it's a sponsor's fault. It's just that if you're dealing with a customer, they want a certain deliverable by a certain time, and that's just the way projects run sometimes. Uncertain requirements. I've run into that a lot, where people say, yeah, I want a project to do this, but I don't really know what the requirements are. It kind of looks like this, and it's vague. People are just not nailing down what specifically they want. That can be a problem at the outset. The design. The design is not, and this is related to the unrealistic scenario requirements. The design might not be the right design, but they're just saying, okay, we'll fix it in the project. But is there time and budget and resources allocated to fix it if at the outset it's not done. And then, of course, there might not be the right technology. The people who have the appropriate talent and technical skills are not available to staff the project at full time or at the appropriate times they're needed. And there could be bad communication occurring, like perhaps there are not enough status reports, risk is not being reported, stakeholders are not engaged, or they're not they're just not available to be able to know what the status is. So that's just right before the project starts that all these problems can be occurring. So next slide. Okay, so now we go to another poll question. Assessment of initial risk can come from the following sources: inadequate sponsorship or stakeholder engagement, funding issues, unrealistic schedules, uncertain requirements, all of the above. And you guys are a very bright bunch, so I am confident you guys will get the right answer.
Yeah, I've opened the poll, guys, so if you want to answer, you got about 10 seconds left. And it's waiting for you. Okay, so the answer, as we're waiting for the poll to finish, go ahead.
Okay, well, yes, all of the above. All four of these items can affect the assessment of initial risk. So that's.
I think this is a good list to kind of look at in your teams and say, okay, because I think one of the challenges I have, Catherine, is that my team doesn't know what risk actually is, and what to identify as a risk when we have to fill in that risk sheet in the beginning of a project. So this is really a good list. These 4 things are good lists to look at and provide to them and say, okay, do we have any funding issues? Do we have a schedule issue? Do we have requirements that are uncertain? So it gives them a little bit more information on how to assess risk. I like that list. Thank you. I'm sorry, just making my comments as we go.
Right. All right. And I saw, yeah, that's great. And I saw that someone else had a comment too, Maureen, but it just kind of disappeared. An example of a project with risks, I think. I didn't quite see that, but yeah, just getting back to what you were saying, Stefana, risk just goes back to the triple constraint of having negative things impact the schedule, the slash timeline, the budget or the cost, and people, resources who are there. Pretty much all trouble on projects that originate from those sources as they affect the quality of it. So, but yeah, these are good. That's a comprehensive list. Okay, here we get to a risk rating, which is the quantifiable area that we're going to be talking about in terms of how does one calculate risk? When is something very risky versus something that's not risky? This is a simple graph that shows, that risk is calculated, a risk rating is calculated by probability multiplied by impact. And they are all from a 1 to 5 scale, pretty easy arithmetic. So the lowest risk would be a 1, which is, a pretty, it's risk, but it probably won't affect much, most of the project. And then you see a range, a suggested range of how risky the green part of a low risk could be. Actually, red indicates high risk, yellow medium risk, and green is low risk, as you guys probably already figured out. And the calculations just help in for people to say, when is my risk a big one? Like let's say a 25 at the other range. Well, if the probability of it's going to definitely occur because, someone in management said this is definitely going to happen, 98%. So yeah, that's probably, the probability is probably going to be a 4 or 5. And that's just going to bring the project to a crashing halt, like an unacceptable schedule delay, the impact of it. So the impact of it is a very undesirable thing, along with the probability of it happening, being communicated, also being extreme. So if you multiply 5 times 5, you get 25, and that makes a risk a very big, a big risk to the project in terms of bringing it to a halt. So we have the spectrum of everything in between, something that's very low risk and very high risk. And this graph just, this graphic just illustrates that.
So Catherine, there's a question from Maureen. She said that she'd like to hear an example of a project and its risks. If you want to filter that in, I know we're coming up to 12:40 and we have about 20 minutes left. So if you want to give some examples as you move forward.
The question was that Maureen was asking about an example of a project and risks.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, cool. Okay. I'll give you a recent example of a project that I did on a Salesforce implementation. It was a very high risk project. I was in charge of the implementation of the Salesforce training for this healthcare company, and when I came on board the project, they were behind schedule. They didn't have enough money. They were spending a lot of money on programmers, and they had a small pot of money, a smaller pot of money for the training, but they weren't. But they were failing in terms of getting to go live dates. We went through over half a dozen go live dates before arriving at the one that we're going to go through. Throughout the life cycle of that project, I had weekly status meetings where I documented the schedule delays, the defects occurring within the system, and raised that to management and to the executive sponsors of the project that, hey, these things are occurring. This is going to drive up the cost of training because training has a huge dependency on when the system goes live, and we can't have vendors be training on materials, producing materials that are incorrect. So I documented those risks, communicated that to management. They adjusted the scope of the training and the time to coincide with the timeline, the correct timeline of the system, Salesforce system release. So that's an example of documenting risks and actively communicating to management so that they are aware and can do something about managing the risks and issues that come up in a project. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thanks, Catherine. We have another question. How effective are companies at identifying risks, and how can we help them improve?
Companies, I find, have been haphazard in terms of identifying risks. If it's a big one, pretty much everyone's generally aware of it. It's just that some risks are, because they're not documented formally, because there's a lack of structure. There's not say a project status report that project managers need to turn in. There's not a PMO. There's not a structure, a communication structure where a dashboard is sent out or a risk register is put on a shared site that people are understanding. That communication and lack of documentation create more risk than is necessary. And if having the communication, having some kind of formal structure, like say not too much because people don't want extra administrative work, having a project status report, having a management communication, having a project status meeting, a weekly project status meeting, that helps communicate risks to everyone in the organization, everyone who wants to participate in knowing more about the project. So hopefully those suggestions might help an organization, help the organization.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. We're on the next slide.
Okay, sure, great. So, right. So basically, we want to make sure that we're identifying risks actively and appropriately as they come up. So organizations, projects don't come in danger of not being done appropriately. So we'll go through individual risk identification management, mitigation plans. I won't spend a lot of time here. We're getting a little short on time anyway, but I just want to mention that mitigation plans should be created for the higher risks, the ones that really derail a project. They would be, if a plan is created, it should be executed through the life cycle of a project to identify the pain point or problem area that it needs to do, and to identify when the plan is being executed, who owns it, what's being done, and to close it when it is done. But not all risks require mitigation plans as kind of a time value thing. And so next slide. Okay. Let's see. We'll go through this poll question really quickly.
So the poll system isn't working. So if you guys want to answer the poll question in the chat, you can read the question on the left and then just write your answer on the right. I think I can guess. What do you think, Kathy?
Yes. Yes, okay. Indeed, it's all of the above. Cool.
There is no all of the above on there.
Oh, I'm sorry, 1 and 2. I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong, I was looking at 5. I'm sorry, number 5, 1 and 2.
1 and 2. Yep.
1 and 2, right. Sorry, looking at the wrong slide. Okay. Let's see, how many, okay.
Are we ready to get to the next, the risk reduction?
Yes, we are. I was looking at how much more stuff I had. So risk reduction and closure. I kind of went over this, so I'll just go over this quickly. Risk can be closed when the risk event occurs and it becomes an issue, or if the risk was totally avoided. That means that the risk never occurred. So that's when you can get that resolved on your tracking document. Risk also may be closed when one of the following has occurred: when the risk was mitigated, but some other solution was put in place, or the risk was transferred to someone else. Let's say there was something that was happening on a project that where you were going to be out a huge dollar amount. Well, if the company decided to purchase an insurance policy, that would be transferring the risk, so that could be closed. Risk remains open and continues to be monitored. That means that the project team is assuming the risk and it's monitoring and seeing if the impact of it occurs. Okay, next slide. Okay, here we have just a whole range of different possibilities of risky things that can happen, and what can we do about it? Because as risk goes down, we have higher quality of deliverable. How do we manage it so that we are able to basically get to where we want in our project? Again, this slide, issue identification and management. Issues come up when something bad has occurred already. It's no longer a risk, it's an issue. And they might come up when a project is has not mitigated a risk, or something just popped out of the open, people didn't see it coming. And again, it affects what I was talking about, the triple constraint of the budget, the schedule, resources, also scope, not being in the new, not being correctly calculated, and quality. The quality of the deliverable suffered. So all of those things create issues in a project, and resolution plans are required for all issues, or just something even to say that, okay, it happened, and the project sponsor has accepted the issue, and they are going to do something else about it at some later point. affects issue identification and how, how it's affecting different portions of project management in this case. So issues, let's see. In the question of time, maybe we can skip this poll question and go on to the next slide. Oh, no, actually we're at the end. So we could do the question and then I'll take other questions if there are any. So issues adversely affecting projects can come from the following areas. And
so is it except number 3, the organizational areas?
That is correct. Yep. That's right. That's not a, right. The organizational areas would not, issues would not come up from that. They would come up from the components of the project, and the organizational area is not really a component of the project. So that is, you're correct. And with that, I'm concluding my risk and issue management presentation, and I'm open to other questions that everyone might have, if there are any.
Great, thank you, Catherine. Team, everyone on the phone, you can actually unmute your line if you want to verbally ask a question now. To do that, you have the option to do a #6 or *6 on your phone, or use the panel on the right under participants and unmute yourself. That'll allow you to ask a question verbally. Maureen says thank you. She's going to her daily stand-up now. Thanks, Maureen, for joining.
Yes, thank you.
As we're ready to do some Q&A, I just wanted to remind everyone while we're getting people to ask some questions here, that there are a bunch of ways that you can communicate with this group, Long Island Women in Tech, and you don't have to be on Long Island to do so. So if you are from outside of our area, you can definitely join us on our Meetup site, Facebook, or on LinkedIn. I do recommend you just connecting to us on one of these platforms so that you can get access to the future calls that we have as well. Okay, I don't see any questions in the queue. Anyone on the phone want to ask a question, Catherine? Anyone want to add or provide their own tips for risk and issue management?
Or if people manage risk and issues differently in other projects or have interesting different ways of doing it that's effective.
Okay, well, I don't see any questions in the queue, but I do want to remind everyone that you all have access to LinkedIn, and Catherine is out there on LinkedIn, so do connect with her. Also, because this is part of our networking group, I will send this recording out to everyone out on the Meetup site so that you can have access to it after. Karen has a question, actually, Catherine. So the question is, she's wondering if anyone is using any off-the-shelf applications to monitor and identify risk in a project. So does anyone have any applications that they use outside of, spreadsheets that we all know and love?
Well, I have done some nonprofit projects where they've used Trello, this app called Trello that you can download on your smartphone, and Basecamp for creating lists and assigning owners to lists. So that's really a nice, Trello actually, it's a very nice way to create a list and to share it with everyone.
I've used Trello for my backlog grooming too, outside of a typical tool. So yeah, I could imagine that to be a really easy tool to use, and it's free. It's a good suggestion. Right. Anyone else have any tools that they use to manage risk? I know at CA we use our own Rally tool to manage our projects, and in there we have the ability to identify risk. I think Trello is really fun because it's easier for us to manage, and we don't have to be on our network to use it with.
Yeah, it's a very easy, convenient way to just look at the app on your phone and see what's at risk. I wanted to mention another tool that I had seen used in an organization, Confluence, Jira. There's a project management part of Confluence, which is agile and has and there is an area for risk management as well. I'm not very familiar with Confluence, but I have seen it. People use it for that, for risk management.
Yeah, and just because I work at CA, I have to write out Rally down for everyone. But they're all pretty good tools. I had to write it down, otherwise I'd be, since we are using their system, I wanted to also mention that on the call. I want to thank CA for donating the access to their WebEx for us to do these sessions. Although this is not run by CA Technologies, they do allow me to take the time, and they also allow me to use their tool. So that was good.
Oh, well, thank you for facilitating this session and being able to talk to everyone about risk and issue management, Stefana. So thank you and CA for hosting this.
No worries, and Catherine, thank you so much. So why don't we close this out, guys, with our first session being done. Thank you so much all for joining. I recognize the majority of the folks on the line, so I'm really happy to see you here, and I hope this was a good time and place, because it was not requiring you to travel anywhere to be on our Summer Lunch and Learn series. Our next of the series should be next Friday. The presenter has not been announced yet, but I will be announcing it sometime today. It's either going to be me talking about DevOps or another presenter that I'm just securing. So please take a look at that when you get a chance. And again, Catherine, thank you so much for taking your time and time out of your day to do this for us today. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Stefana. Thank you. Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.